And now, let's see what kind of questions you guys have. Um, Carissa T asks, I'm curious what three movies. We can bring this a little closer. Oh, no, I can't. There. Ah. Now it's a little more personal. Hi. Carissa T wants to know what three movies I'd recommend for some quarantine binging that inspired my special effects style, cosplay style, or prop collection theme that might offer me some inspiration too. This is a wonderful, wonderful question because people are always asking you for your 4 favorite movies, your 5 favorite movies, your 5 best, your desert island discs, etc. And over the years, I have come to conclude that we don't have favorite things. We have things that are important to us for different sets of reasons. That's my elevator pitch for why that question should be unasked. But Carissa T is asking about movies that inspired my cosplay style or prop collection theme. And in that, I think, Carissa T, you're asking the right question. And it is something like there are these movies that are so important. And there are aesthetic things that have happened in movies that are really important. And I mean, if you looked at some pictures of some of my very early sculpture, you would see in some of them a distinct aesthetic influence from H.R. Giger, the designer of Alien, German, Swiss, I believe, incredible painter who designed the Alien for Ridley Scott, worked on Jodorowsky's Dune, not Doom. And when I first encountered Giger's work in Alien and then in all the subsequent material about Alien, it altered me. It was super important. And part of the way in which I processed how much his aesthetic moved me was I explored it. I made sculptures that felt like pieces, not necessarily exactly like his aesthetic, but that were certainly in the universe of and inspired by. And in doing that, I sort of processed the work. I processed what about his work was interesting and important to me. So along these lines, here are some movies that are super important to my makeup. Blade Runner, obviously. Blade Runner, 100%. Star Wars, but really specifically Empire Strikes Back. There is an aesthetic consistency to Empire that hasn't been matched, honestly, to me. Brazil. Have you not seen Brazil? Then you should see Brazil. In fact, if you'd like to watch it, we here at Tested did an unauthorized commentary of it. What you should know about my history of Brazil is that it is deep and long. Brazil opened famously. The studio that made Brazil didn't want to release it. Terry Gilliam snuck it into the Los Angeles Film Critics Awards, and it won, I think, Best Picture. And that shamed the studio to release Brazil, but they hated it, and they hated it so much they took Terry Gilliam's dailies and cut their own version of Brazil that has nothing to do with Gilliam's version, and it's a remarkable document. When Brazil did open, it was 1985, 86, 86, 80, yeah, right around 86. Where it played in New York City was at the 8th Street Playhouse on 8th Street and 6th Avenue, right below the Jimi Hendrix Electric Ladyland Studios, where Rick Ocasek and Debbie Harry recorded all the time. And I was the projectionist at the 8th Street Playhouse. So not only did I project Brazil for its entire 7-month run, but I sat through it probably once a day for that entire 7-month run. Seriously, that's how much I loved the film. We were using hour-long reels, not a platter system, but we would take our 20-minute reels that we'd get from the studio and we cut them 3 at a time onto hour-long reels. But Brazil was 2+ hours. So Brazil had a 20-minute front reel and then 2 hour-long reels. And so just to know this, when you're a projectionist, They talk about it in Fight Club. There's a little dot you see that shows up on the right side of the screen. It almost doesn't happen anymore because we're watching everything digitally. But back in film days, there was this dot, and the dot was a warning to the projectionist that it was soon time to be changing over from one projector to the other. So I got a 20-minute reel on this one. I got the second, third, and fourth reels on this projector, and I'm looking at those dots. And as soon as those dots happen, I'm doing this chunk and switching to this other projector, and then I'm taking off the 20-minute reel, rewinding it, putting on the second hour. So I still, when I watch Brazil, I still know when those moments are, despite the fact that like the Criterion copy doesn't have those the dots in the corner. And when I say that there's a version of Brazil cut by the studio that's bizarro, amazing, weird. The delightful thing is it's on the Criterion Collections disc. If you buy Brazil, or I am not sure if you can do this through the Criterion channel. I have to check with them. But if you buy the DVD, you can actually watch multiple versions. There was a different version released in the US than in Europe, and then there was this studio cut. Brazil's super, super important. Sorry, I went on a long tangent there, but Brazil is like, yeah. One of the very first cosplays I did at a con was Terry Gilliam's baby masked torturer, which is, since I didn't get any pictures of that, that was just how John Landis and I walked the floor one year. I'm planning to resuscitate that at some point in the next few years. Blade Runner, Brazil, Raiders, super important. Super important for the objects, right? Like the movie's all about its MacGuffins. And there's a way in which when I'm like holding on to a convincing MacGuffin, just this very morning, speaking of Raiders, just this very morning, I have this beautiful Cross of Coronado from Relic Maker on the RPF that I was making better. Literally, I just came in this morning and I was like, you know what? I've never liked that the nails in this crucifix were actually in-molded. So I drilled them out and used straight pins and reattached it. And then I used some oil paint to weather this down. Like, it's never stopping with me. I didn't even film this. This is just like a personal thing. There's a few. Maybe this is also something for us to talk about on the podcast because it's a good question. All right. Let's see here. Empaya asks, what are the best insights you've learned from fields you weren't initially familiar with? That's a big question. I love the efficiencies that different disciplines obtain through their institutional knowledge. Let's see here. I'm not sure I have a distinct answer to this question. I'm not sure I have the distinct answer that you're looking for, except that every time you encounter a new discipline and you learn the efficiencies of that discipline has developed in order to be able to communicate, you learn about efficiency in general. Okay, so here's an example. Jamie and I built a touring show back in 2012. We toured around the world for a few years. A few years later, I also did a world tour with Michael Stevens from Vsauce. And when you're taking a show out like that, you're putting it in 18-wheeler trucks, you're putting your crew on a bus, and you're driving from one city to another every single day. So you're doing a different show in a different city every single night, usually on 6-day weeks for efficiency and to pay to make money, right? You don't want to take too many days off. And you could imagine that these theaters around the country that receive a new show every single day, like how do they accommodate the difference between, I don't know, a one-person show from Craig Ferguson touring around doing comedy to like Les Mis shows up, right? What are the ways in which these theater unions all across the country standardize to know what to expect? And when Jamie and I show up, like they don't know us, they don't know what we're doing. So how do they know what to expect? It turns out there is one metric in the touring industry that they care about. How many trucks do you have? How many trucks? That's it. It's like you have two 18-wheelers. We know how many folks, we need to unload those trailers. Unless you tell us we need more, that gives us a ballpark from which to build how we know that day is going to go. And I love that. There are so many variables for a theater show, for the complexity of a performance. And in the theaters themselves, they care about nothing except how many trucks you have. For reference, I think that U2, one of their later tours back when we were first touring in 12, 13, the tour they had just done was 186 18-wheelers. And I think that might have been the biggest tour ever. Yeah, so that gives you a range from R2 to U2's 186. Yeah, it's a fairly big Megillah. It's like a freaking army. Oh, man. Okay. Okay, Pythor asks, when you were working on your aviators, you had a slab of material on top of your desk. It honestly looked like concrete in the close-ups. What was the material? Could have been two things. One thing is this, which is this is a granite surface plate. This is what's called a reference surface. Machinists, we use these to do layout and to do measuring and checking. Machinists, I say we, I'm a machine operator. I apologize. However, this is a granite surface plate, and I often use it sometimes when I'm working on hot stuff, but I don't think that's the one I was using that day. I think what I was using that day was one of my fire bricks, because I was doing some soldering. And this is something you should have. This is something any maker who's going to work with fire ever should have this, because these are, let's see, these are fire bricks from like a kiln, and you can purchase them for very little money, and they just they don't hold their heat very well. They insulate incredibly well. And I have like 3 or 4 for different soldering and assembly projects for doing brass, brazing, and silver soldering. And they're super lightweight and not that expensive. Thanks. I didn't know that needed to be a tooltip, but I think it does now. Corthane asks, thank you so much for doing these streams. You're welcome. My question is, do you and your family play board games? If so, which do you like best? We don't. And it's not a policy. It's not like we don't play board games. It's just that we haven't played board games. I have lots of friends who play board games and have invited me to come play them, and I have not done that. I particularly love, over the past year, my friends Kim and Clark in Chicago have, over the years, introduced us to this great game called Sets and Runs, often referred to, I found online, as Russian Rummy. It is a brutal slog of a game in which luck matters so much, and you have huge swings of your luck as you go. Very, very enjoyable game. That is the sort of main play with other people game that I engage in up until the lockdown. And I got to tell you, I missed that game. Got to play when I was in Chicago for C2E2. I got together with Kim and played with our friend Dan. That was awesome. And we play here in San Francisco with some friends all the time, but we haven't. And Kim and Clark even figured out how to do it online, but we haven't. It's tricky. You gotta, yeah, it's a whole thing. That being said, it's not like I'm against games at all. And my sons tell me that Settlers of Catan is something that we should try, because they say it's like epically great. I've also heard about El Dorado. I think I actually have that here. I don't think I've brought it home yet, because somebody told me what an amazing game it is. Tamley asks, do you ever lose anything in your shop, and how do you go about finding it? I lose stuff here all the time. The worst is when you're holding on to something small and it drops and it goes, because this floor, yeah, that floor is built to hide small crap. And then when you start to go look into the corners of this shop, the underneath of everything it's a horror show in there. There are a few coping mechanisms. If what you've dropped is ferrous and can be attracted by magnets, I am not above taking a magnet and putting it on a stick and waving it around underneath some of the cabinets. I even have some magnetic pickups up there. There is a really, really cool technique I learned years ago from a friend of mine from MIT, and he called it sending out a search party. So let's say, oh yeah. So let's say you're working with a couple of tiny screws, like these little wood screws, and you drop one, and you have no idea where you're looking everywhere, you can't find it. Oh, and let's say that now I can't find it. Ah, there it is. And let's say that it fell off the table like this, like you bumped it. Okay, so now you can't find it. Sending out a search party is take a second part, put it in the same location, knock it off the table, and watch where it goes. Here's the thing. It's not necessarily going to go next to the other one, although I have had that happen. But it will give you some idea of how far the other one might have gone. Because if there's one thing that typifies all of the looking for tiny little things that I've done here in the shop, is that things can move a lot farther than you give them credit for. Oh my God, yesterday I was finishing this machine I've been building for weeks. I actually finally shot the last bits of it this morning. And it has 4 little rubber feet on this machine so that it's stable. And they were my last 4 rubber feet in my rubber feet bin. I need some more. Oh, wait, I gotta make that note for myself. Got to buy some more rubber feet. Anyway, these were my last 4 rubber feet. And 2 of them had to be customized to fit inside underneath this machine. And I'm installing them. I've customized them. I'm figuring out where they go. I drilled and tapped the holes, and now I'm installing them. I found the correct size bolts, and I can't find the 4th one. I have 3, but not 4. And I had been looking at the 4th one only minutes before, but I move all over here really fast. I move around. It's hard to look in the last place that I looked. And it was round and rubber and black, which means it's going to go somewhere and not be very visible. Oh my God, it was driving me crazy. In those cases, sending out a search party might have worked, although I didn't have any more of that specific one. In the end, I got down on my knees and I crawled around my shop in concentric circles, and I found it over behind the drill press. But hell's bells, Margaret, things can really move when you drop them. They can roll and they can skitter and they can travel way farther than you imagine. And sending out a search party is a great technique for figuring out the radius that your search should encompass. Let's see here. The strike today says, I've become obsessed with sewing your EDC bags for friends and family, so much so that I don't want to work on anything else. How do you handle the desire to focus on a new skill or discipline without continually ignoring the other areas of making? Again, just as a point of protocol with your question, I don't necessarily desire to focus on a new skill as much as I'm always interested in what a new skill could give me. So it's always project-based. The skill acquisition is always project-based, not obtaining the skill for the skill's sake. But that's just a minor point that I felt like making. Your bigger question, I have gotten a lot out of my life by focusing on the things that are obsessing me. So I do end up ignoring a lot of things that I should be working on because I'm working on stuff that I'm kind of obsessed with. And I can cope, right? I'm a functioning human being and I'm a professional. I work with other people. So I get my stuff done eventually. I deliver the things I've said I'm going to deliver eventually. But yeah, I do a lot of ignoring of the stuff that I ought to be doing because I want to keep working on this one thing that I'm totally working on. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're going through is a problem. I really appreciate that you're making a ton of them. You should send some pictures. We'd love to see them. And at a certain point, you may see some new thing that I mean, this is what happens is you dive into an obsession and eventually you use it up. It's not like you don't become obsessed anymore with the thing, but on a project based how do you say this? On a project by project basis, I would imagine that there'll be a point at which you reached your limit of making EDC bags. And at that point, you may have a different point of view about them, about this or that feature. Look, that line of exploration is always really useful. Like I say, I can count a lot of the features of my life right now, and I can say that following my obsessions has been directly responsible for those features of my life as it plays out right now, and I'm very grateful for that. Because I also think that when we're obsessed with stuff, we become more granularly self-aware. Yeah, it's that, right? The first time you make something, it's just this mystery. It's a cloud of facts, and you're just kind of like, this seam, that seam, doing it. And then you make one. Now you've got some knowledge, and you make 5. And now you have a different set of knowledge from those 5 than you did from the first one, right? And each time you're doing that, you're expanding a knowledge base. And you also expanding your point of view, right? So there's a certain point at which something that may have been acceptable for the first copy, it's not for the 5th, and some brand new thing shows up for the 20th copy. That's right there. That's self-exploration, man. That's the whole point we're here. So keep it up. Fake Blood says, I noticed you talk to yourself while you build alone. I do the same. It seems to help. How critical is your internal monologue, though? Do you curse a lot when things inevitably go wrong? My internal monologue is very cursy. And how critical is your internal monologuing? Very critical. Very critical. Yeah. But it's hard to turn that off. It's hard to not turn that anger about doing something dumb or making a mistake. It's hard not to turn that on yourself. So mistakes. Let's talk about mistakes for a second, because nobody escapes them. They all happen. Everyone has them. And one of the things that a lot of you who are watching this right now are regular watchers of the tested videos. So you've noticed and you've commented on the fact that over the past 2.5 months we've been sheltering in place. I seem to be making a lot more mistakes in the videos of stuff I'm building here at the shop. I'm not making more mistakes. You're just seeing more of them because I'm shooting everything with a single camera and it's all just playing out. There are so many times when I will like mess something up and there'll be this pause and I'll just be like, oh, you stupid idiot. I'll say to myself, you stupid idiot. Oh my God, I can't believe you've done this. And I'll look up and I'll see Gunther or Joey holding the camera and I'll be like, give me 5. And they're like, okay, they'll give me 5 minutes. But I don't think I should do that anymore. I literally think that I got to let those play out. So you do see mistakes in the old videos. They certainly showed up, but there are certainly plenty of times, and Gunther and Joey can attest, that I asked for some space to kind of work something out. And I think I'm really glad. I didn't expect that there'd be more mistakes in the videos that I'm shooting during lockdown because it didn't even occur to me. But of course, that makes total sense. As for how critical one gets, it's hard. It is. We are our own worst critics. And we could all be a little more gentle with ourselves. Yeah. We could all be more gentle to ourselves, and we could all keep realizing that it's not about us. It's not about us. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about us. The more you realize that, oh my God, the happier you will be. And I say this to myself. The more you realize this, I say to myself in the mirror, the happier you will be. It's not about me. Would you consider an episode on how you sharpen your tools and why it's important? Well, sharpening your tools is super important because sharp tools cut well, and unsharp tools are dangerous things that want human flesh and they want to drink your blood. That being said, I am such a sharpening neophyte, and I am such a sharpening. I mean, I have a whole set of different sharpening stones, and I certainly can take like a chisel and, oh wow, that one needs some real help. I could certainly take a chisel and put a reasonable edge on it, but somehow, like on my Japanese chisels here, I just can't quite get that edge that's on this. And it's, if a chisel has an excellent edge and you don't abuse it, it'll keep that edge for a long time. Sharpening is super, super important. Sharpening your drill bits, having your saw blades be sharp, replacing your table saw and bandsaw blades once they're dull, once it takes a lot of work to push stuff through, makes your work so much better. But the reason that I have never done a sharpening video is because I don't feel nearly any expertise about it. And I tend to try and stay away from stuff that I don't have a distinct point of view on. Like every time I go to sharpen something, it's like, all right, let's see if we can keep from screwing this one up too badly. That's literally how I think about sharpening stuff. And I watch videos on it, and I've seen that beautiful Russian knife sharpener that's $500, and I have a version of one from Craigslist I bought years ago. And I can bring in a blade to a fairly high degree of sharpness, but sharpening stuff is such a specific discipline and such a specific zone. And I even have watched tons of videos on the makeup of different steels and different metals and how they sharpen and what's going on the molecular level. And still, I would feel weird doing a video about it. I got plenty of a point of view about how to put two pieces of wood together or to put two pieces of aluminum or steel together. But when it comes to sharpening, I still feel so much like a babe in the woods that, yeah. It's not that I wouldn't. It's not that I wouldn't make a video. It's more like what I need is a real sharpener, a human who's an expert at it to teach me a bit. Because the problem with when you go look up sharpening as a discipline, the signal to noise ratio is practically 1. It's the same for like making a good cup of coffee. Everyone has an opinion, and all their opinions are like the only opinion you could have, and everybody else is an idiot. And there's no way to weight these things because there are efficiencies. There are ways to do some things quickly and some things with great meticulous slowness. And not everyone needs a 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 80,000 grit sander or surface for sharpening stuff like you see online. Like there are grades, but it's really hard to figure out institutionally from a knowledge standpoint what's important and what's not important. In this vein, when we bought our house here in the Mission, it had been owned by some .comers, and they had a single station, full-on steam espresso maker plumbed into the kitchen. This is the kind of kitchen item I would have never bought. And I stared at that thing for 3 months. And then we hired a barista from Ritual Coffee to come over to the house and teach us how to make a cup of coffee. I had spent hours and hours and hours online looking up how to use one of these things. And again, signal to noise ratio 1. And it was a nightmare. And the barista came over and was like, yeah, fill the milk up to about here. You want to make sure this happens and this happens. And with this, the more you do this, it tastes like this. And you can experiment with what you like. And here's the sound the milk should make once it's done. And it was like, done. This is, it doesn't have to be this mountain to climb of total perfection. And yet so many people kind of stake out these territories of like, I am the master of this discipline and I'm going to tell you the only way it can happen. That nothing makes me run for the hills more than that kind of gatekeeping. My goodness, it's already 2 p.m. Good Lord. Okay. Who was your most influential teacher? I have been lucky to have several influential teachers. My great uncle Paul Sheldon had a workshop near the house. My family has a house on Cape Cod that my great grandmother bought in 1900, and my family has been going there every summer for 120 years. And near the house that we have was Sheldon's place, and Uncle Paul had a wood shop, and I learned my first hole drilling, hand sawing, tying knots, and making things at his knee. And that was a lovely thing that he did, to let the kids on the point come to his shop and mangle his equipment. And, he also saw, I remember being like 10 years old and making something wrong. I wrote about this in Every Tool's a Hammer, and making something wrong and getting all bent out of shape about it, and sitting there kind of trying to fix my mistake. And someone comes in and like, how's it going? And my Uncle Paul said to them, well, Adam screwed something up and he's really getting angry at himself over it. And I was like, oh, he can see me. How can he see all this stuff that's going on inside my head? I didn't realize how visible it is on our faces. So Paul Sheldon, hey, that's the timer saying that the money might be dry. I'm going to finish this story about the teachers. I also had I had several great, wonderful teachers in high school. I had an art teacher, Mr. Benton, let me really do anything that I wanted in the art department. Anything that they had, I could pull it out and figure out how to use it. It's the first time I used an airbrush, first time I used a vacuum form machine. So many things I got to learn because Mr. Benton was just like, dude, go with go do your own thing, whatever you want to try. My freshman earth science teacher, Dan Frere, a force of nature. And the first teacher to whom I asked a question that said, I don't know, which is one of the most powerful things a teacher can say to a student, especially when you're 13, 14, when you're a young person like that. You think that teachers hold all the authority. And so the idea that they don't know something is actually quite surprising. And there are a lot of teachers who don't want you to know that they don't know something. But Dan had a healthy enough ego that he would say, I don't know. And so I would go during lunch. I mean, I didn't get along with my peers very well. So during lunch period, I would go sit in his class and watch him grade papers and ask questions about like candle flames and things like that. I had a creative writing teacher in junior or senior year named Mrs. Gortzma. And she also, what typifies, Mrs. Gortzma was amazing. We were doing a class exercise in which we got separated into different groups, and I was finding myself, like always, with the outcast group, right? Take a class of 20 kids. There's like 3 popular ones, there's a whole bunch in the middle, and then there's the bottom 3. And there I was, always with the bottom 3, the boneheads, the losers. That was me. I was one of them, right? And I'm sitting there doing this exercise with these other 2 kids, and like, I'm just feeling like crap. And I went to her after class and I was like, is this my life? Is my life always going to be like this? And she said, this is so important. She said, sweetie, you are going, I don't think she said sweetie, but like, that's the vibe, right? It was a sweetie vibe. She said, you're going to leave here. You're going to go to college. You're going to walk through the front door and 5 people are going to be walking towards you. And they're going to end up being your best friends for the rest of your life. And she wasn't far off. That within that first year at NYU, I met many of the people who would end up being so important to me in my life. And what typifies all those teachers is that they saw me. They saw me and they gave me a view of myself. This is a really, really, really important thing. And when we talk about class size, this might be, for me, the greatest argument about keeping class sizes small. And it's that. And why remote learning, as much as we'd love it to work, is look, it might work for some students. It sure probably works for some students, but kids need to be seen. That's what all kids are trying to do, trying to figure themselves out. And when someone shines the light of seeing them on them, they bloom. They photosynthesize, right? It's real. And each of these teachers saw a facet of me and reflected it to me in a way that still abides, that still teaches me about myself. And teachers love doing that. Teachers love seeing into their students and helping them understand how the world works, even incrementally. They all signed up to do that. They all signed up because of the endorphin rush of getting a kid to go, oh, then, right? Like that is real. And when you have 30 kids in a class, there's no freaking time for a teacher to do that. Yeah, I did have some lucky teachers. What a Maroon asks, if you could have one Mythbusters event or myth immortalized in a Lego set, which one would it be? What a Maroon. It's one of my favorite Bugs Bunny jokes. What a Maroon. What a gullible. What a nin-cow poop. All cow-based puns. And I ran into a comedian years ago. I'm just going to go off on a tangent about your username. I ran into a comedian years ago. I think his name was Hyman Caston. And I'm pretty sure. And he said he referred to somebody as a maroon. And I was like, I love that. Maroon. It's like it's a cow pun because it's moron, but it's maroon. And he was like, that's not a cow pun. It's just a funny, like, it's almost moron, but it's not. And I was like, no, it's a cow pun because the other two puns are name cow poop and gullible. And he was like, yeah, I still don't buy it. And I'm like, how I've laid out all the facts. This is a trio of jokes that are played in order. Of course, it's a cow-based pun. I'm still upset about it. And I can have one Mythbusters event immortalized in a Lego set. It's hard to beat the cow catcher making all 20 of the cars fly apart like a ballet. That was stunning. Some of the scariest driving I have ever done. Rocket car. There are 3. Actually, you could do the Mythbusters playset. You could do rocket car. You could do the cow catcher. And then what's the third one? You could do moon landing, but it's not that interesting. The stuff that Jamie and do the water water skiing behind the excavator. I loved excavator myths. Those were so much fun. I recently drove past one of the barges we rented on that episode for Jamie and I to use 2 excavators to basically paddle swim a barge back to shore. That was great. That was really great. That would be a fun Lego Technics build, right? Yeah, those 3. There you go. Let's see. Do you ever just chill out in your shop, like sitting around having a beer? Not really. But that's the kind of space it is, right? Like this space is for me, this space is for working. If I'm here, I want to work. Like both of those things are true. I didn't realize that spaces could engender their use until I was staying. So back in the early 90s, I was living in the Western Addition and working as an art assistant for Chico McMurtry of Amorphic Robot Works. They're now in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And I was one of Chico's assistants for a couple of years. Pull a lot of all-nighters making dog monkey robots. I made DM2, which I think is still around now. I built DM2 for Chico. And at one point, Chico went off to do a set of shows in Czechoslovakia, then Czechoslovakia. And I stayed in his shop down on Yosemite Street in the Bayview. And I was amazed. So like that shop, that living there was horrifying, right? Like the bed was a shipping crate. Seriously, it was a foam mattress in a shipping crate. And it was every bit as dirty as you might imagine a foam mattress in a shipping crate might be. And it was a great space to live in because I had welders, I had a lathe, I had a baby mill, I had all sorts of tools. But what amazed me was once I was actually sleeping there, was that shop wanted you to work or get out. Like I saw Chico in a different way once I lived in his space because there was not even a couch to hang out at. There was a single espresso machine for making a little espresso and like a toaster oven, and that was it. And that's where I understood that shops can have an attitude about what you should be doing in them. And this shop's attitude is you should be working. Now, I do have a leather chair over there in the display area where sometimes when I want a break, when I need a break to kind of clear my head, I will sit in that chair and kind of surf the web, or check Twitter or something like that. But for the most part, I barely do any computer surfing, computer just like vegging here in the cave. Yeah, it's like I need to leave here to go do that. That being said, there's certainly been some lovely late afternoons when like Simone's around, Sean Charlesworth, Mark Dubois. Sorry, Mark Dubois comes over, and like, there'll be some people hanging out here, but that's rare. It's funny. It's rare. It's rarer than I thought it was. All that being said, I really like one of the things about the lockdown that I miss is having people around, is having people move through the space, because, when we're filming for Tested, there's always people kind of moving around here. And it's like it's a little culture, it's a little work culture. And I love that culture. I love seeing those people every day. So I miss that. So that to me feels like hanging out, right? Like sitting there and going over the things that you made with somebody, or talking through a problem, or someone comes through. Oh yeah, let me show you this thing I've been meaning to. Oh, take this thing. You can, work with this. Yeah. I don't think that was the actual answer to your question. No, it was. This shop wants me to work, and when I'm here, I want to work, or I got to go. It's very true. So sometimes I'll make a mistake so egregious, I'll just leave. That's rare, but that definitely happens. Like I'll make a mistake and I'll be like, and I'll just like, I gotta go home. Yeah, and I've definitely done that. Wow, this time is passing so fast. What tool or tools do people often overspend on? What cheap version is just fine? That is a nifty and awesome question. What tool do people overspend on? While I am thinking about an answer to that, I will say that within, like, this is a common frame of question I get. And the frame is, how much should I spend on my tools? Which is, every maker grapples with this. I grapple with this. I've been working on accuratizing my lathe, and it's like I could eliminate those last 2/1000ths of run out just by spending $1,500 on the best chuck, but I don't want to. I don't. That's way too much dough, man. That's. I'm not going to invest it for an extra 2/1000ths, right? It's diminishing returns. So the question, where should I allocate the funding I'm going to spend on my maker space? And again, I think this is advice that could work for musicians or dressmakers or carpenters or anybody who works with stuff in which you need to buy material help, right? Tools. My advice is, if you're not sure a tool is going to be useful to you, buy the cheapest possible version of it. And if it is useful to you, then buy the best version you can afford. And the best example I have of this is hold on. Yeah. Bring the tool over and show you. Yeah, there we go. And look at this one. Yeah, okay. So, I'll get that later. Know how much I love pop rivets. I built my first suit of armor using pop rivets, and my toolboxes using pop rivets. And somewhere in around 1999, I learned that there are pneumatic pop riveters, and I wanted one. And yet they're expensive, like over $100, $150. And that was money I couldn't afford back then for a tool that I wasn't sure was awesome. And then Harbor Freight came out with like a $25 air riveter, and it maybe lasted for 100 rivets, but that was long enough for me to know that that was a tool that I needed. And I purchased this one, I think in the early 2000s. And it is a freaking fantastic tool. sounds great, feels great. None of this using a hand riveter and just wrecking your hand. And then when we went and made Savage Builds, Milwaukee was our tool sponsor, one of our tool sponsors, and they sent me a catalog, and I discovered that they have a cordless. They have a cordless riveter. This thing is not bad. I still prefer the air riveter. I still like this one a little better. But really, the point of the story was, once I understood that this was useful to me, its value to me increased. And therefore, I didn't necessarily go buy the $275 Pro one that's used on factory floors or something like that, but I bought one that was like reasonable to me. So I think that anybody who buys it, like somebody who goes out and is just learning carpentry and goes and spends $700 on a joiner, that strikes me as like, I'm not sure you need a joiner. I've never used one in the carpentry they've done. I totally understand how useful they are, and I would love to have room for one in here because I would use it. But for the most part, for most of us, honestly, a table saw is pretty darn sufficient. There are ways in which, again, like the people, the that signal to noise ratio of people saying you can only do things with this, where you can be led to believe that there are that you have to have X, Y, and Z in your shop. For instance, I don't have a chop saw in here. I've had a chop saw in my shop forever, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, I don't need a chop saw here. I had it stored under something because what I might need it, but I use the cross-cut sled on my table saw, and that supplies all the cross-cutting that I need. I don't need it. I have 3 chop saws in storage. Actually, I think I gave one to Simone, and I think I lent another one to Ryan. But yeah, like chop saw is not something 10 years ago. If you'd said to me, you don't need a chop saw, I'd be like, yeah, of course I need a chop saw. No, I don't, it turns out. It's a process. It's an ongoing process. Fellow floater asks, are you still getting out on your one wheel between builds during this craziness? I did. I took a nice long one wheel ride just Sunday afternoon. Yeah, Sunday afternoon. I recently, yeah, it was lovely. I went from the Mission over, I went through the Wiggle, up Van Ness, through the Presidio, all the way out to the coast, around to the Golden Gate Bridge lookout, down through Crissy Field and across the marina, up Columbus, down to Market Street and home. It was 14 and a half miles. And I ran out of power about 2 blocks from here, which to me is like, that's as good as making it, right? Like that's to me is like, that's awesome. The absolute exterior limit of what the one wheel is capable of. And the only reason I didn't make it is because I went too fast for the first half of the ride. And that's the thing, is like you get better at it and you go faster and you use more power. But if you really want the long ride, if you really want the 17 miles that it's spec'd at, you got to go at like 10, 12 miles an hour, not 17 or 18 miles an hour. I wear a helmet for those long rides. And it's actually really nice because there's a lot less traffic in San Francisco. So it feels a lot safer. And San Francisco is a great bike city now. I love the bike lanes on South Van Ness that are raised. It feels really great. I love the protected bike lanes on Valencia. We are at 2:24. Thank you guys for joining me. I know I've already said that, but I'm feeling very grateful. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday at the same bat time at the same bat channel. All right. Have a great one. Bye, everybody. Now, I'm going to turn this camera off and get back to work.